On September 2, 2005, at 10:35 a.m., the cruise ship Monarch of the Seas was docked at the port of Los Angeles when 3 crew members went down to the lower compartment of Deck 3 to perform a simple maintenance task on the sewage system. Their names were Fidel Lora, Alfredo Rivas, and Miguel Ángel Vargas, all experienced workers with years of service aboard Royal Caribbean vessels. The area seemed calm. No alarms were sounding. The task was routine: disconnect a clogged drainage pipe in the wastewater system. But when they opened the inspection valve, an almost invisible cloud escaped into the air. It was hydrogen sulfide, the most lethal toxic gas found in sewage systems. Within seconds, the smell of rotten eggs filled the room. In less than 30 seconds, all 3 men were on the ground. The gas acts fast. It paralyzes the sense of smell, destroys the respiratory tract, and shuts down the body before the mind realizes what is happening. A 4th worker, who tried to rescue his colleagues, also collapsed but was pulled out alive a few minutes later. Firefighters arrived at 10:49 a.m. The official report stated, confined space, inadequate ventilation, lethal concentration of H2S above 1,000 ppm. None of them had a chance to survive. The accident occurred on U.S. soil, while the ship was still docked, which amplified the public reaction. Royal Caribbean was sued and, years later, admitted to serious failures in training and safety measures for work in areas at risk of gas exposure. Fidel, Alfredo, and Miguel were buried in their home countries. The 3 died working aboard a luxury ship, suffocated by an invisible gas that no passenger would ever see. In the early hours of April 7, 1990, the ferry MS Scandinavian Star departed from Oslo, Norway, bound for Frederikshavn, Denmark. On board were 482 people, 383 passengers, and 99 crew members. Among them were Norwegian families, Portuguese sailors, and Danish workers. The weather was calm, and the sea was flat. Shortly after 2 a.m., thin smoke began to rise from Deck 3. Minutes later, flames reached the stairways, racing through the corridors as if the very air had caught fire. The alarm sounded too late. The first officer on duty, Bjorn Rortveit, tried to coordinate the firefighting efforts, but the blaze spread inside the walls. The melamine and PVC laminate materials fueled the flames instead of containing them. The corridors became tunnels of smoke. The fire doors, which should have closed automatically, jammed open. Many passengers were asleep. Others, awakened by the chaos, were quickly overcome by toxic cyanide and carbon monoxide fumes. Some managed to reach the lifeboats, but dozens were trapped inside their cabins. On Deck 5, the Norwegian Larsen family, Anne Tor, and their 7-year-old son Marius, tried to reach the main staircase. They never made it to the surface. They were found embracing each other near the emergency door, already poisoned before the fire reached them. When Danish and Swedish rescue ships arrived at 5:30 a.m., the Scandinavian Star was a mass of metal and smoke. 159 people died that night. Initial investigations concluded that the fire was deliberately set. The main suspect was a Danish passenger named Erik Mork Andersen, found dead at the scene, but years later new evidence showed that several separate fires had been started in different parts of the ship, something he could not have done alone. The case was never fully solved. And to this day, the Scandinavian Star remains remembered as the worst maritime fire in modern European history. After the tragedy, the International Maritime Organization changed dozens of safety protocols. Louder alarms, mandatory crew training, and the use of less flammable materials. But for the families, the pain has never faded. It was January 12, 2014. The cruise ship Norwegian Breakaway, carrying more than 4,000 people, was sailing peacefully through the Caribbean, bound for the Bahamas. The sun was blazing, the sea was calm, and the pools on the main deck were crowded with families. Around 10:40 a.m., a group of children played in one of the shallow pools, supervised only by parents and tourists. Among them was 4-year-old Quentin Hunter, traveling with his mother, Tiffany Hunter, from New Jersey. In just a few seconds, the sound of laughter and chatter turned into screams. A passenger noticed a child motionless at the bottom of the pool. 2 guests, a retired police officer and a nurse, jumped into the water and pulled him out. They immediately began performing CPR while the crew tried to clear the crowd of onlookers. The captain announced a Code Oscar, the medical emergency signal. But it was too late. Quentin did not respond. He was taken to the ship's infirmary, where the onboard doctor confirmed his death minutes later. The cruise was in open waters, with no helicopters available. The news spread among the passengers, and the pools were silently emptied. The case revealed a serious flaw. At the time, Norwegian Cruise Line did not have lifeguards stationed at its pools. The company changed its policy only 3 years later, after other similar tragedies. Quentin's mother, Tiffany, told the Miami Herald, "I thought he was safe. It's a luxury ship, full of people, with music and joy. I never imagined he would die just a few feet away from me." Since then, major cruise lines have begun to include pool supervisors on some of their ships, but not all. Quentin's case remains one of the saddest and most preventable accidents ever recorded in international waters. On the night of December 13, 2017, the cruise ship MSC Musica was sailing from Istanbul to Sochi, crossing the icy waters of the Black Sea. On board were hundreds of Russian, Greek, and Turkish tourists enjoying the calm of the night. Among them was Lim Yuna, a 31-year-old South Korean performer known for small shows on cruise ships and in international clubs. She had boarded 2 days earlier, hired to sing during the passengers' dinner service. Around 2:40 a.m., security cameras captured her silhouette walking alone along the outer deck, near the safety railing. The sea was calm, but the wind was strong. Seconds later, she vanished from the frame. No alarm was triggered. It wasn't until 6 a.m., when the crew noticed her cabin was empty, that the captain declared a "man overboard" alert. The ship stopped its route and joined Turkish Coast Guard units in the search, with 2 helicopters and a fast response vessel deployed. For more than 12 hours, no trace was found. The water temperature was 12 degrees Celsius, about 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause fatal hypothermia in less than an hour. Her body was discovered 3 days later, near the coast of Trabzon in northern Turkey. The forensic report concluded that the cause of death was drowning due to an accidental fall. No evidence of struggle, intoxication, or suicide was found. Investigators believe that strong winds and the wet deck contributed to her fall. The tragedy of Lim Yuna received international attention. After the incident, MSC implemented new safety measures, including higher railings and nighttime motion sensors in exterior passenger areas, safeguards that had not existed before. Her body was repatriated to Seoul, and the ship resumed commercial voyages days later. But among the crew, the event left a silent warning. At sea, one wrong step is enough to never return. It was January 13, 2012, a Friday. The Costa Concordia, the pride of the Italian fleet, was leaving the port of Civitavecchia, near Rome, for a luxury cruise through the Mediterranean. On board were more than 4,200 people. The captain was Francesco Schettino, known for steering close to the Italian coastline to show off the ship to the public. At 9:45 p.m., the Costa Concordia was sailing dangerously near the island of Giglio. Without warning, a sharp, cracking sound pierced the air. The ship had struck an underwater reef. The hull was torn open, and water began flooding the lower compartments. Flickering lights, alarms, screams. The crew didn't know what to do. Within 20 minutes, the ship tilted nearly 70 degrees to the starboard side. People slipped through the corridors as chairs and tables crashed against the walls, and dishes shattered everywhere. As hundreds tried to reach the lifeboats, chaos erupted. Many jumped into the freezing sea in desperation. Others were trapped in flooded cabins, where oxygen was quickly running out. The ship came to rest partially against the rocks, preventing a full sinking, but inside, it became a tilted, submerged maze. Coast Guard divers described scenes of horror: bodies wedged between metal doors, people suffocated inside elevators, passengers crushed by loose furniture. In the end, 32 people died, many from drowning or internal trauma. Captain Schettino abandoned the ship before the rescue was complete. He was later convicted of manslaughter and gross negligence. The Costa Concordia was removed 2 years later, in one of the most expensive maritime salvage operations in history. The disaster became a symbol of how pride and human error can turn luxury into tragedy. On the night of April 10, 1991, the Italian ferry Moby Prince departed from the port of Livorno, in Tuscany, with 141 people on board. Its destination was simple: the island of Olbia, in Sardinia. The sea was calm, and the sky was covered by a thick fog. At 10:25 p.m., just minutes after departure, the ship violently collided with the oil tanker Agip Abruzzo, which was anchored in the bay carrying 80,000 tons of crude oil. The impact tore a massive hole in the tanker's hull. Flammable fuel spilled into the sea, and within seconds, an explosion turned the night into a sea of fire. The flames engulfed the Moby Prince almost instantly. Passengers were trapped inside, suffocated by dense smoke and unbearable heat. The electrical system failed, plunging the ship into total darkness. Inside the main lounge, fire spread across carpets and curtains. Many tried to reach the deck, but the doors had warped from the heat. Others ran toward the windows, only to realize the air outside was pure burning fuel. Radio communications were cut off. No clear distress call ever reached the Coast Guard. For hours, passengers remained locked in a deadly sauna, inhaling toxic gases and burning alive. At dawn, all that was left was a charred hull and dozens of bodies identified only through DNA testing. Only one person survived, a young sailor named Alessio Bertrand, found unconscious on the deck, covered in soot and barely alive. The official report concluded that most victims died of carbon monoxide poisoning before the fire consumed the ship. But the suffering was unimaginable. They died slowly, conscious, trapped, and breathing smoke until their final breath. The Moby Prince disaster remains the worst maritime accident in Italy's peacetime history, and the waters of Livorno, even today, are remembered as the place where fire defeated the sea. In the early hours of February 22, 2007, the ferry MV Lavina 1 departed from the port of Jakarta, Indonesia, bound for the island of Bangka. More than 300 people were on board. Passengers, crew members, and truck drivers transporting flammable cargo stored in the ship's hold. Just a few hours after departure, thick smoke began to pour out from the lower hatches. It was 5:45 a.m. The fire spread quickly across the decks, fueled by the gasoline and oil from the vehicles stored inside. Within minutes, the flames multiplied, driven by the sea wind. Alarms sounded, but the firefighting systems failed. The heat was so intense it melted metal stairways and made the floors tremble beneath people's feet. Panic erupted. Some passengers tried to take shelter inside their cabins, not realizing the toxic smoke there was even denser. Others, in desperation, jumped into the sea amid the flames. Many died burned alive before even reaching the upper deck. Survivors described scenes of absolute chaos. Muffled screams, children crying, and air so hot it seemed to burn the lungs from the inside before one could even breathe. Rescue vessels arrived hours later, by which time the ferry was nothing but a burning skeleton of metal drifting on the sea. More than 51 bodies were recovered. Many charred, others drowned or asphyxiated by smoke. Hundreds were injured. The MV Lavina 1 remained afloat for 2 days after the blaze, partially destroyed, before sinking completely during the investigation, taking with it remains of victims and forensic equipment. Authorities later discovered there were no functioning smoke detectors and no proper evacuation plans in place. The tragedy exposed the shocking negligence in maritime safety standards across Southeast Asia. Today, the wreck of the Lavina 1 lies on the seabed, a metallic tomb, silent, cold, and filled with stories no one lived to tell. It was the early morning of October 11, 2024. The cruise ship MSC Virtuosa, one of the largest in the world, was sailing through the English Channel, between France and the United Kingdom. On deck, a cold wind blew steadily. Inside, music still echoed from the bars and restaurants, even after midnight. At 12:43 a.m., security cameras recorded a woman walking alone near the railing on deck 15. She leaned on the handrail for a few seconds. Then she disappeared. The ship's safety system automatically triggered a "man overboard" alert. The captain slowed the vessel and initiated the immediate search protocol. Crew members launched lifeboats and flares into the dark waters of the channel. But the sea was rough, and visibility was almost zero. At 2:07 a.m., a British Coast Guard helicopter spotted something floating in the frigid water. It was her body, motionless, still wearing the evening dress from the night before. Paramedics tried to resuscitate her, but the ship's doctor confirmed her death during the rescue. Authorities reviewed the internal footage and confirmed She hadn't jumped. She slipped. The deck was wet from early morning condensation. One wrong step, and she fell more than 40 meters, straight into the freezing sea, where waves reached 3 meters high. Her body was taken to the port of Southampton. No passengers knew her personally. She had boarded alone. The case was widely reported in the United Kingdom, and MSC Cruises pledged to reinforce nighttime safety measures and install infrared sensors on balconies. But for those who saw the footage, one feeling lingered. The speed at which life vanishes at sea is faster than the time it takes for the alarm to sound. The MSC Virtuosa resumed its voyage hours later. Silently. The sea, once again, kept the secret. Gas, fire, water, silence. 3 elements, 3 different ways to die in the same place. The sea. Fidel, Alfredo, and Miguel suffocated on an invisible gas deep in the hold of a cruise ship that promised luxury and comfort. The victims of the Scandinavian Star and the Moby Prince burned alive, trapped between metal and fire, with nowhere to run. Little Quentin, just 4 years old, drowned before hundreds of people in a pool that was supposed to be safe. On the Costa Concordia, luxury turned into panic, and the bottom of the sea filled with screams that no one ever heard again. On the Lavina 1, the air itself caught fire before anyone could take a breath. And on the MSC Virtuosa, one slip was all it took for the ocean to claim another life, in silence. They all boarded to live an unforgettable experience. And they did. Just not in the way they imagined. These stories share one truth. No one ever knows the exact second when it all ends. Not the screams, not the fire, not the sea. None of them give a warning. The lights stay on. The ships keep departing. And the sea, unmoving, keeps waiting. Because in the end, the sea never forgets.